Hi, everyone, and welcome to a special one-on-one edition of Newsmakers TV. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Wednesday, February 26th, and I'm very honored and delighted to welcome back to the program a true community hero and treasure, former Santa Barbara Mayor Sheila Lodge. Over the past half century, she served a total of 36 years, either as mayor, city council member, or planning commissioner before deciding to retire from the Planning Commission in December of last year. As she retired, the Independent praised her as her focused and sustained, no nonsense dedication to preserving Santa Barbara's unique and historic sense of place. Close the quote. She is the author of Santa Barbara, An Uncommon Place American Town, which is essential reading for anyone interested in public policy and land use planning in our city. And she's also the subject of a new YouTube film by my friend Thomas Reynolds, which we'll link to in the show notes. Mayor Lodge, welcome back to Newsmakers.
Well, I'm happy to be here, Jerry. It's been a
So
while.
you were honored at the Board of Supervisors yesterday. Drew a huge crowd.
Oh,
Might have been there for a few other things, but uh,
yeah.
Supervisor Roy Lee presented a proclamation honoring you for your unparalleled service and contributions to preserving the beauty, integrity, and community spirit of Santa Barbara. And I would put a emphasis on unparalleled. Paralleled. No one's been at this longer in terms of planning and development, land use issues. But as you look at where we are today, the moment Santa Barbara's in today, from the sweep of your career, what concerns you and what gives you hope?
What concerns me is what the state legislature has chosen to do, which has meant the possibility of a eight-story apartment building right next to the Santa Barbara Mission. It's a builder's remedy project. Um, I have hope that it will not happen. Um, it's it's an impossible project for that location and for Santa Barbara anywhere actually, what is being proposed. Um, and for years now, the state legislature has been adopting laws that tell Santa Barbara or every local community jurisdiction to do things that are not best in the long run for Santa Barbara. Nick Welch made a comment about me being a radical that I saw recently, and I sort of went, "What?" And then, as I thought about my career, I started out on the Planning Commission supporting a significant downzoning, which tried to fit the potential future development of Santa Barbara, what could be handled with our local resources like water. Air quality was a big issue at the time, traffic handling capacity, and it fit within our resources. Well, then more recently, like in 2010, I proposed what became the AUD program, which allows densities up to 63 units to the acre, which is unheard of anywhere in Santa Barbara County, or I'm not even sure if LA allows such densities. And I realized that, wow, I certainly had shifted, but it can be done well. Uh, I was inspired by a housing authority project. I, oh, goodness, it's at the corner of Castillo and West Carrillo.
Right.
Uh, and it's 57 dwelling units to the acre, and it fits in beautifully. So I was hoping that that's what would happen.
Yeah.
And
The, a lot to unpack there. Let's start with the project you referenced in back in the mission, the proposed eight-story building. When I read about that, I was reminded of the episode that you write about in your book about the two towers that were proposed for Alice Keck Park, which at the time a lot of people were really in favor of. I don't remember, was it 11 stories or however many stories, but it would have been a blockbuster. You were involved in helping to stop that. Are you concerned that if this project at the Mission would go forward, it sort of paves the way for more of the same?
There aren't any other um, projects that came through. There was a brief period of time where, because the city did not have an approved housing element, and that was because the state housing and community development department, which had to approve it, hadn't gotten around to it yet.
That was convenient, wasn't it?
Yeah, and so the there's that project, and the same people have another one on Grand Avenue, which is uh, not as horrific, but getting close. I was thinking, as I left the Planning Commission, I didn't resign, by the way. My term ended December
I
31st.
said retired. I didn't say resigned.
Oh,
Okay.
oh, okay. Well, some people got the idea that I had resigned. Um, my term was ending anyway. It was my fourth one, and I hadn't applied for reappointment. So um, there,
Following up on the Mission project, you talked about the requirements that the state has sent down, the mandates that the state has sent down. I mean, it seems to me that it's basically just a frontal attack on local control, and especially on the kind of very cautious and I think detailed and nuanced local control that's been exercised by various levers of government in Santa Barbara. Um,
Santa Barbara had the first architectural board of review in the country in 1925, and it was an idea that came from Bernard Hoffman, who, by the way, in writing the book and doing research on it, is the one who, well, it's his wife actually, Irene, who came up with the idea of building in Spanish colonial style and restoring what we still had here, like Casa de la Guerra, which is what the Hoffmans did. And then they built they restored the Lugo adobe across the street on the block east, um, and built some charming studios there, um, and that it was her influence. And by the way, they are both thanked in a tile plaque in the street in Spain in El Paseo.
oh,
That was
really?
1935. Yes, it says to Irene. Can't remember which name comes first, but anyway, they are both specifically named. Um, so
So that really set, I mean, the Architectural Review Board really sort of set the template for the detailed carefulness with which planning and development went forth in Santa Barbara.
well, Santa Barbara was also early in establishing a planning commission, which had
Mhm.
been authorized like in 1915 by the state legislature, that cities could have such commissions. And with the state legislature said to even improve architecture, but to reasonably provide for development in a community, um, through the use of zoning and so on, where you don't get things like I like 9-story apartment buildings next to the Mission.
And that's what's being eroded because one of the mandates is it limits the number of local hearings that you can have on a project. And that's
Yes, that's true, and that's oh my goodness, it just went through after I left the planning commission. The city attorney pointed out that this project had had more than five hearings. It was an appeal on Farello Road, and
Mhm.
so it stood approved.
Let me go back to something else you said earlier when you talked about the population limit. I think that was what, 1975? People,
Maybe that was a population goal. With everybody's
population goal,
set a limit, yeah,
but it was 85,000.
right.
And the notion was that is the carrying capacity of the city in terms of land, water, sewage, traffic, all these other sorts of things. And it was approved. And you and I have had this conversation multiple times, and this is something I always ask local candidates. I mean, is that still the ideal number of people for Santa Barbara? Because it seems like I mean, we're obviously over it now, but we're sure headed for a lot more.
Um, if conditions changed, like one of the critical things is water. Do we have enough water for these people? Well, to my surprise, um, against the legislature requirements on water usage for appliances such as washing machines and dishwashers are such that they use much less water than they used to. And in doing the planning for the water department, even with an increase in population, water use is anticipated to go down. People are much more, I think, ever since the drought that was presumably my fault, the one in the late 80s and early 90s, um, people just got used to using less water. And, and so we've never gone anywhere near using the amounts of water we were using before that, which was over 16,000 acre feet. And it went all the way down to 12,000 plus an acre foot of water is how much water there is in an acre of
At a
one,
foot
one
deep,
foot,
right?
1 foot depth. Yeah.
We used
Uh,
to, when I was at the Chronicle, I used to require that in every story about water, it contained the sentence that would be the equivalent of flushing your toilet 60,000 times. So that
well,
would,
and there are some places in Santa Barbara that still have toilets that flush, to use 7 or 8 gallons of water per flush.
right, right.
And I remember the plumbers coming before the city council when we were considering, this was years ago, requiring low flush toilets in new construction or in remodeling. Oh, they're never going to work. They're terrible. They're awful. And they work just fine.
Yeah.
And,
So in terms of that number, 85,000, what do you think the number is now?
well, the census says it's around 90,000.
No, but I mean, what's the ideal number?
The ideal number? Well, I think the city can accommodate more than that than the 85,000, but it has already.
Right.
Part of the problem is that many of the housing units are being used as short-term vacation rentals, and they're not available for people who live here, which is really harming the housing situation, making it worse.
Yeah. When you look at the issues around homelessness in Santa Barbara, do you view that primarily as a housing issue, as a housing shortage issue, or do you view it more as a mental health issue?
mental health and drug addiction and sort of all of the above. It's a combination, and it's a very difficult issue. We had Santa Barbara was attacked for, including in by a national cartoonist, um, for being heartless as far as the homeless were concerned. And at the time, we were the only place in the Tri-Counties that was doing anything, that had any facilities for them. Um, it's a difficult situation, and the city temporarily was using a motel on Upper State Street, and
Didn't work well.
people that obviously have issues of various kinds, and they need not just housing, they need social services and
Yeah.
health, mental and physical health services.
Yeah, it's just interesting to me the way that the issue has got, I mean, among people who want to do something to help the homeless situation has gotten divided between housing first and foremost, and then people like the mayor who've taken more of the stand that you just stated in terms of mental health and addiction services, are sort of attacked for being anti-housing or being anti-homeless or something like that, which seems a little screwy to me.
Yeah, I had a young man who said he told the police that he was a student at Santa Barbara City College, and he came in. Came into the up to my secretary and asked if he could talk to me, and so I said yes. And he was from the East Coast. He had been in jail in a juvenile facility for, I think he said, found it hard to believe at the time, for killing somebody. Uh, he was obviously very bright, but told me that he had a difficulty in seeing a whole line of text,
Mm-hmm.
and couldn't. I can't think of what it's called, but and he for a while we had homeless sleeping on the on the front porch, you might call it, of City Hall. Um, and he was staying there with his mother. It
Oh.
was an interesting situation, and I often wondered what became of him.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about your origin story. You grew up in Arcadia in the San Gabriel Valley, is that right?
No, I was born there, but
Uh-huh.
my parents were dairy farmers, and they were among the early victims. I don't know if that's the right word, but of the clash between ag and urban uses.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they they moved there in, I think, 1925 or earlier. They'd been in the Bay Area, and they decided they were going to start a chicken ranch or a poultry farm. But until the chicks got to egg laying stage, there was going to be some time, and so they got a cow for the family, which consisted at that time of just my brother, who was 9 years older than I. And the cow produced more milk than the three of them could use, and so the neighbors would buy milk, and so there were more neighbors that asked for if they could buy some milk from them. So they got another cow, and finally they ended up, I believe, with about 125 cows. It became a dairy, and just chickens for the family, for eggs for the family. Uh, and then in 1929, as more houses began to be built around there, and people started complain around the dairy, started complaining about it. And so they sold in 1929 when I was just 6 months old. They moved to Ojai, where they started a small dairy. They're a really small
Oh,
dairy. I think there was only 17 or 18 cows. And I don't know, if you want to talk about a 24/7 hour day long job, that's it. The cows must be milked in the morning and in the evening, or else if they're not regularly milked, they start stopping producing as much milk.
so that sort of prepared you very well to be mayor.
Well, I was 9 when they sold that dairy.
In Ojai.
Yeah, and but because of that, and because they had friends and we had family in Santa Barbara, we visited here fairly often. So I remember Santa Barbara from
Oh,
the
you do as a girl.
30s, yeah, as a child, and that was a time when if you go to the beach, you go to West Beach. East Beach seemed like it was out of town. Uh, and you could lean up against the storm wall that's there along Cabrillo. And that's what we do, sit on the sand along there, and the water wouldn't be very far away. But then that was all the 30s, was also when the breakwater was built, which slowed the drift of sand and ended up with creating that big beach that's there now,
Yeah.
caused the necessity for and regular dredging so that boats could get in and out of the harbor. But
So after they sold the place in Ojai, did you stay in California or?
oh yeah, they moved up to the Bay Area, and I lived in several different places. They lived in several, and then my father worked was a grocery store clerk. Well, he was a produce person, and in a grocery store downtown Palo Alto.
Uh-huh.
And
So how'd you end up here?
well, I ended up here because I had a boyfriend that my mother didn't approve of in, in Menlo Park, and when we were living there. And so she sent me down here to stay with some cousins
To get away from the boyfriend?
to get away from the boyfriend. And my cousins set up a party where they invited they thought were the eligible young men. I was 18 at the time. Um, and as it turned out, unfortunately, I married one of them. And after 2 children and 12 years and a divorce, and he was from Santa Barbara. So that's
Mhm.
how I lived here.
Okay.
Fortunately, I've been here,
And
lived
and
here.
how did it happen that you got involved in politics?
Oh, excuse me, my my parents were always interested in what was going on in the world around. And it was a dinner table subject of conversation. Like I can remember conversation about the Civil War in Spain. This is in the 1930s.
Hmm.
What's going on? And then it turned out my mother-in-law, my first husband was a student in college back east. He was a veteran. And we came here every summer for the summers. And that was an interesting experience for me because it's totally different culture. It was like going to a different country.
Mm.
The school was we lived in Annapolis, Maryland. And the school was St. John's College. It's, I think, the third oldest college in the country. Uh, and but there was also the Naval Academy there. And there was also a large Black population. And when I looked at the map and I saw that Annapolis was north of Washington, D.C., I thought, well, it's not in a southern state. I was wrong. I was so wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
they had,
So how did you land in local affairs here?
oh, well, that was my mother-in-law was a member of the League of Women Voters, and
Oh,
and so I learned about it through her, and I credit the League with really educating me about local government. They had a program, what they would do, they still do, but you don't have to go to the meetings. In those days, they weren't covered by TV. There wasn't TV or the kind of access we have now where we can just watch online uh, council meetings, board of supervisors meetings, planning commission meetings, and all of them you can watch that way. In those days, we had a um, a group called the Observers, who would go around to the planning commission meetings, council meetings, supervisors meetings, and report back to the membership as a whole. Well, I ended up being chair of the Observers. And as I observed these different bodies, I decided I could do that. And I was interested in the planning commission, and I applied and was appointed. And that was how I got started with this.
yeah, and you ended up as not only the longest serving mayor, if I'm correct, but also the first woman mayor in Santa Barbara. What was the what
That's
what kind of things did you face in doing that? Was there a lot of
well,
opposition?
I've been asked about that. And election night, my first election as mayor, one of the reporters was at the county where they were counting the election results, tabulating the election results. And this reporter asked me how I felt about being Santa Barbara's first woman mayor. And I said, I really don't think about it that way. I'm just glad to be Santa Barbara's next mayor.
Hmm.
So, and that's, and then after when I was a council member, I was asked to participate in a panel. It's going to be discussion in the LA area about the problems of serving as a woman on a city council. And I said, I really don't, I haven't had any problems because I'm a woman and I haven't figured out why. I know, I remember Shirley Chisholm, uh, Black woman from was a member of Congress and ran for president years ago. And said she had more trouble because she was a woman than she did because she was Black. Um, I just never experienced that. And I've puzzled over it. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's Santa Barbara. Uh,
I know why. Because you research and study and are so prepared on every single issue and are so formidable about it that nobody would dare question you in
well,
that context.
that's interesting. You have those beliefs about me. But yeah, I do. But I think the other thing
Yeah, you do.
the other thing is that I've always treated everybody I, it wasn't something that was conscious. I treat everybody with respect, and I get respect back.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Well, so why did you decide to hang it up? Why did you decide to retire now from the planning
well,
commission?
I am 95 years old, and I didn't expect to hang around this long. Uh, and I'm planning to apply actually for the Historic Landmarks Commission.
Oh,
And
good.
yeah, I just, I'm just so much of a public policy wonk.
Well,
That's
you have such a passion for this stuff. Where does that come from, do you suppose?
It's fun to have a say in how the city operates, develops, and and um, and there have been all kinds of things like from the freeway, getting the freeway actually built, there was discussion of the freeway in Santa Barbara in the state records with the State Department of Transportation going back to 1945. And hopefully what I fought for was improvements to Santa Barbara done the right way.
Yeah.
And there was a big battle over that freeway and how it was going to be built. And we finally got one that doesn't cut off downtown from the waterfront and so on, and is fairly acceptable.
Let me ask you real quick about a couple of projects that are out there right now that have some controversy. Give me your quick take on them. What's going on at La Cumbre, both with the old Sears building and with the Macy's building?
Well, it's all going to become a housing. Well, not all become a housing. What the owners of the Sears parcel are proposing is all housing, apartments. And when I proposed what became the AUD program, I drew a map which included La Cumbre Plaza because I thought it was a good place and I wasn't anticipating that the retail would basically be gone. Although what is being proposed by the Taylors for the part where the May Company is now does include retail.
Yeah.
Much less than what's there now. It is.
Have you looked at their plan?
I've looked at what they're proposing. They're not in a very detailed stage yet.
Yeah.
Interestingly, there is a fault line that goes through the property in which they have to not build on, propose to build on. But one of the sad things about that whole thing is that one of the reasons I was very unhappy with Doss Williams, who shot down
because he torpedoed the general.
The ability to do the funding, which had been recommended by a subcommittee of the group Santa Barbara County Association of Governments, SBK, which was proposed to allocate $1 million for this,
Yes.
And so it's happening where the people who have the Macy's and are coming up with their thing, and
they're going above the height limit.
Yep.
What do you think of that?
They are using the state density bonus law, which in exchange for providing some very low income housing, gives them more density, and so their density is way up there. What is proposed for the Sears parcel is about half the density there, and it's significantly less than what the city ordinance would allow.
Yeah,
and then it's very very pleasant Spanish colonial revival.
What about El Paseo? What's your sense of what's going on there?
El Paseo or
Paseo Nuevo.
Yeah, Paseo Nuevo. That I don't know. It's still in negotiations. I understand what is going on there.
What do you think ought to be there? Mostly housing?
Yeah, it should be a combination. It should be a combination of housing and retail. But the whole retail business, it's not just Santa Barbara where there's been this big decline. Although during the pandemic, I visited Ventura, and they're closed. They closed. I'm not sure, 5 or 6 blocks to cars, and it's all pedestrian. They don't have any e-bikes,
Hmm.
and it was perfectly pleasant to walk up and down there. And there was one vacancy in all the 5 blocks that
Wow.
but it had a sign in it saying "coming soon." Or it had been leased, and I've been trying to figure out why.
Yeah, what's the
Now,
difference
there's a
between that
long,
and State Street?
yeah, and there's a long history, even during the time that I was a council member, of rents being extremely high and on State Street, and there are certain tax advantages to property owners if they can say that, well, if to set rents very high, and then say, well, they take it as a loss off of another property that is rented. I don't know just how it works.
Yeah.
It
Do you
was
think we should reopen State Street to cars?
part of it. I think it's too long.
Yeah.
I, I've been fortunate that I've had the opportunity to do a fair amount of my travel, and I've been in numerous cities that have pedestrian streets that are very successful. Um, but the only one that's longer is in um, Copenhagen. They're pedestrians,
Copenhagen's slightly bigger than Santa Barbara too.
not all that much, but
No?
yeah. But they and it's been there for a long time.
And what about the e-bikes?
The e-bikes, I'd love to see them gone. I'm on the planning commission. I voted against allowing them because we first of all, there are bicycle shops, existing businesses that rent e-bikes, and
Hmm.
uh, and more than one of them. And one of them at that time was on State Street, and the others tended to be in the waterfront area. Um, and it just seemed, and I still feel like the private business is making money off of public property, and
Yes.
they're paying a sort of a token amount
Yes.
for their use of the public property.
All right. All right. Well, you've been so generous with your time, but I do have to ask you, what advice do you have for your successors who are involved in making these important decisions? I mean, sometimes I feel that your sensibility about the town, about the intense caring and passion and very detailed and specific oriented is kind of lost. It's all like housing, housing, housing right now, bikes and so on and so forth. What do you think people ought to have in mind as they look at projects in Santa Barbara going forward?
I could read my book, which again is called Santa Barbara, an uncommonplace American town.
Plenty of free parking. I even figured out how to show it on the screen. It
Well,
is. It really, I mean, it's so well done and so well researched and so important to anybody who would presume to be a decision maker or a policy maker in Santa Barbara.
and it's not, with the, as I said, with the AUD program, which allows up to 63 dwelling units to the acre, and the most in the county, the cities or the county, I think uh, is like 25, like Santa Maria, as I recall. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the maximum is up to like 25 dwelling units to the acre, and we allow up to 63.
Is that because of the AUD?
Yeah,
Yeah, average value.
No, that wasn't, I hadn't proposed anything quite that high when I proposed it, but the council pushed it up to that.
Yeah.
And some of the projects are 63 units to the acre. And the idea was it grew out of um, a charrette put on by the two weekend charrette in which the developers and architects and so on were going to prove that if the density was high enough, they could build market rate, middle income affordable units. Well, they did show that both for sale and for rent. They proved that they couldn't build for sale, but that they could, they said, build for rent units that would, well, this was 2011, that would rent for, the rents would start at $1,250 a month for a studio. Well, some of them come on the market and the rents
Hasn't happened.
oh, they're 2.5 times that.
Yeah.
And it just, I learned through that rents will be what the market will bear. And I had one developer tell me that when got approval for a project downtown with no parking. And I asked him, sort of knowing what the answer would be, that if rents would be lower because there was no parking. And he just looked at me and he said, rents will be what the market will bear. And that's in Santa Barbara, that tends to be rather high.
All right. Well, with that truism of capitalism, I gotta thank Sheila Lodge, former mayor, council member, planning commissioner, and community treasurer, really, of Santa Barbara. Thank you so much for all you have done and do. And we're delighted to hear that you're going to be trying to get on the Historic Landmarks Commission. I'm going to take a wild guess that you're going to succeed in landing that seat, but we greatly appreciate you taking the time.
Okay, well, you're most welcome.
Thank you, Sheila. Bye-bye.